My name is Adrian Wu, and for 7 years I lived the most elaborate lie of my life. Not to deceive others, but to protect my own heart from the very betrayal that would eventually destroy me anyway. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., I'd wake up in our modest two-bedroom apartment in Queens, kiss my wife Clara goodbye, and take the subway to my IT job in Manhattan. I'd spend my days troubleshooting servers and fixing network issues for a mid-sized consulting firm, earning a respectable but unremarkable $75,000 a year. Clara would roll her eyes when I'd come home with stories about difficult clients or system crashes, always reminding me that I could do better if I just applied myself more. What she didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that I was sitting on a $600 million fortune. My grandfather, Henry Wu, built Wu Global Shipping from nothing. Starting with a single cargo vessel in the 1960s, he'd transformed it into an empire spanning continents. Ports in Shanghai, Singapore, Rotterdam, Los Angeles, the Wu name was whispered in shipping circles with the kind of reverence reserved for legends. But Henry Wu was obsessed with one thing: making sure his heir would value character over capital. When I turned 25, he sat me down in his sparse Chinatown office, itself a facade, as Wu Global's real headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower downtown, and explained the test. "Adrian," he said, his weathered hands folded on an ancient desk, "I've watched too many fortunes destroy the souls they were meant to elevate. You will inherit everything, but only when you've proven you can live with integrity when no one is watching, love genuinely when you have nothing to offer but yourself." So I chose to live small. I rented that Queens apartment, took the IT job in Manhattan, and told myself I was conducting the greatest experiment of my life. Could someone love Adrian Wu the person, not Adrian Wu the heir? Could I find authentic connection in a world obsessed with status and wealth? I thought I had found it with Clara. We met at a coffee shop in Brooklyn 3 years ago. She was struggling then, just starting her Instagram account, working part-time at a boutique while dreaming of influencer stardom. I was immediately drawn to her ambition, her fire, the way she talked about building something from nothing. She seemed real in a way that felt rare and precious. She said, "I don't need a man to save me," on our third date, stirring her latte with fierce determination. "I'm going to build my own empire, my own brand. I want a partner who gets that, who supports that, not someone who thinks throwing money at problems is the same as caring." I fell in love with that version of Clara, the one who worked 16-hour days, who celebrated every 100 new followers like they were gold medals, who would curl up next to me on our secondhand couch and plan her dreams with infectious enthusiasm. I supported those dreams in the only ways I could without revealing my truth, helping with her website coding, driving her to brand events in my aging Honda Civic, listening to her frustrations about the algorithm changes that could make or break a creator overnight. But success changed her. As her follower count climbed, first to 10,000, then 50, then breaking 6 figures, something shifted. The girl who used to be grateful for dinner at our neighborhood Thai place started dropping hints about restaurants she'd seen other influencers posting from. The woman who once mocked basic bitches obsessed with designer handbags started following luxury fashion accounts with religious devotion. "You know, Adrian," she'd say, not looking up from her phone as she scrolled through images of women draped in Hermes and Cartier, "sometimes I wonder what it would be like to actually live the lifestyle I'm always posting about. Like, wouldn't it be amazing to not have to worry about money for once?" I'd nod and suggest we could start saving more aggressively. Maybe I could pick up some freelance projects. Inside, I was calculating that her dream lifestyle represented roughly what Wu Global earned in shipping fees every 3 hours. But the test held me back. Henry's words echoed constantly. When you have nothing to offer but yourself, that's when you discover what love really means. Claire's content evolved too, where she once posted authentic moments, messy apartment corners, no makeup selfies, real talk about the struggle. Everything became curated perfection.
Her apartment transformation posts featured increasingly expensive decor that I knew stretched our budget to the breaking point. Her fashion hauls showcased pieces that cost more than some people's rent. And always, 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 there were the comments from other influencers and their wealthy boyfriends. The kind of crowd that made my IT salary look like pocket change. The final months before everything fell apart, I watched Clara become someone I barely recognized. She would spend hours getting ready for events I wasn't invited to, claiming they were networking opportunities or brand partnerships that required a certain aesthetic. She'd come home late, smelling like expensive champagne and cologne that definitely wasn't mine, with stories that never quite added up. "You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under," she'd say when I'd ask about her day. "This industry is cutthroat. I have to maintain a certain image, certain connections. It's not like your little IT world where you can just show up and do the same thing every day." Her dismissal of my work stung more than she knew, because while she saw a dead-end tech job, I was actually overseeing strategic investments that had grown my inheritance to nearly $800 million. While she pitied my lack of ambition, I was quietly funding startup companies and reviewing acquisition proposals that would reshape entire industries. The irony was exquisite and heartbreaking in equal measure. But I held on to hope. I told myself that Clara was just going through a phase, that success was intoxicating, but she'd remember what really mattered. I'd planned elaborate surprises with our modest budget. Picnics in Central Park with her favorite foods, movie marathons of the obscure films she used to love, weekend trips to small towns where she could disconnect from the constant pressure of content creation. "This is nice," she'd say, but I could see her fingers twitching for her phone, her eyes scanning our surroundings not for beauty, but for content opportunities. "But Adrian, don't you ever want to be the kind of man who can take his wife somewhere that doesn't require checking Groupon first?" The question haunted me because I could take her anywhere. Private jets to Dubai, shopping sprees in Paris, dinners at restaurants where reservations required connections I'd inherited along with the Woo name. But would that Clara love me, or would she love what I could provide? The answer came on a Tuesday evening in October, delivered through the cruelest possible messenger: technology itself. I was setting up our new smart TV, an anniversary gift Clara had insisted we needed to keep up with content trends, when her phone, connected to our Wi-Fi, automatically synced with the device. Suddenly, her text messages were displaying on our 55-inch screen in crystal clear detail. The most recent thread made my blood freeze. "Baby, I can't wait to get out of this prison and into your penthouse for real. 2 more months of playing house with my pathetic husband, and then I'm all yours. The divorce will be quick. He's got nothing to worth fighting over." The response from someone labeled V came immediately. "Patience, my goddess. Soon you'll have everything you deserve. A real man, a real life, real luxury. Poor Adrian won't even see it coming." I stood there, remote control trembling in my hand, watching my marriage dissolve in blue and white text bubbles on the screen where we'd planned to watch Netflix together that night. 7 years of careful living, of choosing love over legacy, of believing that authenticity could triumph over materialism, all of it crumbling in real time. But the next message destroyed me completely. I actually feel bad for him sometimes. He tries so hard with his little surprises and his sweet gestures. He has no idea how embarrassing it is to be married to someone so ordinary. My followers are starting to ask why I never post about my husband anymore. What am I supposed to say? "Oh, meet Adrian. He fixes computers and thinks Olive Garden is fine dining." Victor, when we're together, I finally feel like I'm living the life I was meant for. The remote slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor. In that moment, I realized that my grandfather's test had revealed something far more devastating than I'd ever imagined. It hadn't just shown me whether Clara could love me for who I was. It had shown me exactly who Clara really was. And tomorrow I would have to look into her eyes, knowing that everything I thought we'd built together was nothing more than her elaborate performance while she waited for her real life to begin. The irony was so perfect it felt like cosmic justice. The woman who was leaving me for being ordinary was walking away from one of the largest fortunes in the world. But first, I had to survive the confrontation that would change everything.
I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages burning against my eyelids. Pathetic husband, embarrassing, ordinary. Words that cut deeper than any physical wound because they came from the woman I'd restructured my entire life to love authentically. Clara came home at 2:17 a.m., heels clicking against our hardwood floor with the confidence of someone who believed her secret was safe. I was sitting in our living room, the TV now mercifully dark, watching her through the shadows as she tried to move quietly through our apartment. She'd gotten better at these late arrivals over the past 6 months, developing a practiced routine of hanging up her coat, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror, and slipping into the bathroom to remove her makeup, though I now realized she was probably washing off evidence of her other life. "Adrian, you awake, babe?" she whispered, her voice carrying that familiar tone she used when she was testing whether she'd been caught. It was the same voice she'd use when she'd spent too much on something and wanted to gauge my mood before confessing. "Yeah," I said simply. "We need to talk." Even in the darkness, I could see her body tense. Clara had always been good at reading people. It's what made her such an effective influencer, that ability to sense what her audience wanted and deliver it perfectly. But now that skill was working against her, every instinct probably screaming that something had shifted. She flicked on the overhead light, and I got my first clear look at the woman I'd married. Her makeup was indeed gone, but her dress was wrinkled in a way that suggested it had been removed and put back on. Her hair, which she'd left the house with in perfect waves for what she claimed was a brand dinner, was now loosely tied back in a style she only used when she was trying to look effortlessly beautiful. Everything about her appearance told the story of an evening that had nothing to do with business networking. "What's wrong?" she asked, but she was already moving into damage control mode. I could see it in the way she set down her purse just so, angling her body to project openness while keeping her phone screen facing away from me. "Clara, who was Victor?" The blood drained from her face so quickly, I thought she might faint. For just a moment, the careful influencer mask slipped, and I saw raw panic in her eyes. Then, just as quickly, she shifted into a different mode entirely. Not denial, she was too smart for that, had probably seen the certainty in my expression, but defiance. How did you?" Then caught herself. Her chin lifted, and suddenly she was looking at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. "You went through my phone," I said quietly. "Your messages synced to the TV. I saw everything." She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her calculate her options. I expected tears, apologies, desperate explanations. What I got instead was something far worse. Relief. "Oh," she said, and her whole posture relaxed. "Well, I guess that makes this easier." The casual cruelty of that response hit me like a physical blow. No remorse, no explanation, just relief that she wouldn't have to keep pretending anymore. "Makes what easier, Clara?" She walked to the kitchen, opened our refrigerator, and pulled out a bottle of wine. Expensive wine, I now realized, that she must have bought with money I thought we were saving for our future. She poured herself a generous glass and didn't offer me any. "Look, Adrian, Victor and we're in love. Real love. The kind of connection I never thought I'd find." "What about us?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "What about our connection?" She laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed off our kitchen walls, sharp and dismissive. "Connection? Adrian, be honest with yourself. What connection? You come home every day and tell me about server problems and difficult users.
You think taking me to chain restaurants and planning picnics constitutes romance? You drive a Honda Civic that's older than some of my followers. You've worked the same dead-end job for 7 years without a single promotion. Each word was chosen with surgical precision, designed to cut as deeply as possible. I realized that Clara had been cataloging my perceived failures for months, maybe years, building a case against our marriage that justified her betrayal. "I supported your dreams," I said weakly. "I helped build your platform. I believed in you when—" "You helped," she interrupted, her voice rising. "Adrian, you know basic HTML. That's not helping. That's like saying someone helped build a skyscraper because they handed someone a screwdriver. Do you know what real help looks like? Victor flew me to Miami last month for a brand collaboration that paid more than you make in 3 months. Victor introduced me to photographers who've worked with actual celebrities. Victor takes me to restaurants where the wine costs more than your monthly car payment." She was pacing now, wine sloshing in her glass, years of resentment pouring out like poison from a lanced wound. "And do you know what the worst part is? I convinced myself I could be happy with mediocrity. I told myself that love was enough, that being with someone genuine mattered more than being with someone who could actually provide for me. But Adrian, I'm 29 years old. I have 200,000 followers. I get invited to Fashion Week events. I have brands reaching out to me every day. And I'm supposed to pretend that coming home to this," she gestured around our apartment with genuine disgust, "is some kind of fairy tale?" I looked around our home through her eyes and saw it differently for the first time. The furniture we'd picked out together at Target and IKEA, the wedding photos in frames from the dollar store, the kitchen where we'd cooked together every Sunday, sharing dreams and building what I thought was a life. "Clara," I said, trying one more time to reach the woman I'd fallen in love with, "money isn't everything. We built something real here. Real?" She spun around, wine nearly spilling. "Adrian, nothing about this is real. You know what's real? Victor's penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Victor's Maserati. Victor's connections in industries that actually matter. Victor's ability to take me to places where I don't have to pretend to be impressed by a $40 dinner." She drained her wine glass and set it down hard on the counter. "I've been living a lie for 3 years, convincing myself that I could be satisfied with this version of life. But I can't. I won't. I deserve better than this, Adrian. I deserve better than you." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, absorbing the full magnitude of her contempt and feeling something fundamental break inside my chest. This wasn't just about the affair. This was about everything I was, everything I'd chosen to be, being found completely inadequate by the person whose opinion had mattered most. "So what now?" I asked. Clara walked to our bedroom and returned with a manila envelope I hadn't seen before. She dropped it on our coffee table with a gesture that felt like throwing down a gauntlet. "Divorce papers," she said. "My lawyer drew them up last week. It's pretty straightforward. We split whatever pitiful assets we have, and I move on with my life." I stared at the envelope, trying to process the level of planning that had gone into this moment. While I'd been picking up her favorite Thai food and planning weekend getaways, she'd been consulting lawyers and calculating the fastest way to escape our marriage. "You had this all planned out," I said. "Of course I did. I'm not cruel, Adrian. I wasn't going to just disappear one day. This is the mature way to handle things." Mature. She was calling her calculated betrayal mature. "And Victor knows about all this?" Her face softened for the first time since we'd started talking, but not for me. She was thinking about him. "Victor knows I deserve to be cherished, not settled for. He knows I'm worth investing in, worth showing off, worth building a real future with. Next month, he's taking me to Milan for Fashion Week. Can you imagine? Milan, Adrian. When was the last time you took me somewhere that required a passport?" I could have told her then, could have revealed that I'd taken business trips to Milan, Shanghai, Singapore, that Woo Global Shipping maintained offices in every major port city in the world. Could have explained that I carried a black American Express card that had no spending limit, that my pathetic husband status was the most expensive performance art project in history. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the dawning realization that Clara had just given me the greatest gift imaginable: absolute clarity about who she really was. "Sign the papers, Adrian," she said, her voice gentling in what I suppose she thought was kindness. "I know this is hard, but Adrian, someday you'll understand. Someday you'll find someone who's actually compatible with your lifestyle, someone who appreciates simple things." She was already talking about me in past tense, already relegating our entire relationship to a mistake she'd learned from. "One question," I said. "Did you ever love me? Even a little?" Clara considered this with the same expression she used when choosing
The divorce proceedings took exactly 63 days. I know because I counted each one, watching Clara transform from my wife into a stranger who appeared across from me in sterile conference rooms, her lawyer doing most of the talking, while she checked her phone and posted Instagram stories about new chapters and authentic living. What Clara didn't know was that her new chapter was being written by someone with a very different pen than she imagined. I signed every document she put in front of me without argument. When her lawyer suggested I was entitled to half of her social media business assets, her follower count, brand partnerships, and intellectual property, I waived those claims. When they calculated our shared debts and assets, arriving at a modest sum that represented our entire financial life together, I agreed to split everything exactly down the middle. "Your client is being very reasonable," Clara's lawyer told mine during our final meeting. "Most husbands would fight harder for a larger settlement, especially given Mrs. Woo's earning potential." I almost laughed. Clara's earning potential, roughly $200,000 annually from her influencer work, represented what Woo Global Shipping earned every 17 minutes. But I just nodded and signed the papers that would give me $23,000 from our joint savings account and half ownership of our Honda Civic. Clara herself seemed almost giddy during these proceedings. She'd arrived to each meeting looking progressively more polished. Designer handbags I'd never seen before, jewelry that caught the light in expensive ways, clothes that whispered luxury brand names. Victor's influence was transforming her outer appearance as quickly as she was shedding her connection to me. "You look good," I told her after one particularly tense session about dividing our wedding gifts. We were standing outside the lawyer's office and she was waiting for a black car that definitely wasn't an Uber. "Thank you," she said, then caught herself being kind to me. "I mean, I feel good. I feel like myself again, you know? Like I can finally breathe." The implication was clear. Life with me had been suffocating, a prison sentence she'd served with admirable patience. "I'm glad you're happy," I said, and meant it. Her happiness was about to make what came next so much sweeter. "Adrian," she said, and for a moment her voice carried a hint of the woman I'd married, "I hope you find someone who appreciates this version of you. Someone who's content with quiet evenings and simple pleasures. You're a good person, just not the right person for me." Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with the kind of smile I used to think was reserved for me. "Victor's here," she said, not even trying to hide her excitement. "He's taking me to look at apartments on the Upper East Side. Can you imagine? I might actually live in Manhattan." I could imagine, actually. I could imagine that Woo Global owned 3 buildings on the Upper East Side, including one with a penthouse that had been featured in Architectural Digest. But Clara hurried toward her black car without waiting for my response, already mentally moved on from our conversation and our marriage. That night, I made a phone call I'd been postponing for 7 years. "Naomi," I said when my assistant answered on the first ring, "it's time." Naomi Park had been managing my hidden life with the efficiency of a Swiss watch since I'd started this whole charade. While I troubleshot network problems, she'd been fielding calls from Woo Global's board of directors, managing my investment portfolio, and ensuring that my grandfather's shipping empire continued to expand under my secret guidance. "Are you sure?" she asked, though I could hear the relief in her voice. Naomi never approved of my marriage experiment, calling it unnecessarily masochistic more than once. "Once we flip this switch, there's no going back to being ordinary Adrian." "The test is over," I said, and I passed with flying colors. Clara just taught me everything I needed to know about the difference between loving someone and loving what they can provide. Within a week, my transformation began. I quit my IT job with a simple email to HR. "Please accept this as my formal resignation. I won't be serving the standard 2-week notice period." My manager called, confused and concerned, asking if I was having some kind of breakdown. I assured him I was having the opposite of a breakdown. I was finally putting myself back together. The modest apartment in Queens was the first thing to go. I'd grown genuinely fond of that place, with its creaky floors and temperamental heating system, but it belonged to a version of myself I was ready to retire. In its place, I moved into the Woo family penthouse, 30 floors above Central Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private elevator that opened directly into the foyer. Naomi met me there on moving day, her arms full of documents that represented the real scope of my inheritance. "Woo Global's quarterly reports," she said, spreading papers across the marble kitchen island that was larger than my previous apartment's entire kitchen. "We're up 23% from last year. The Singapore expansion is ahead of schedule, and the new automated port in Rotterdam is exceeding all efficiency projections." I studied the numbers with the same focus I'd once applied to server diagnostics. Woo Global wasn't just large, it was a behemoth, controlling crucial links in the global supply chain. Everything from the coffee Clara ordered on her phone to the designer clothes she'd been flaunting came through ports where my family name meant something. "What about personal investments?" I asked. Naomi smiled. "Your portfolio is healthy. The tech startups you invested in during your IT years have particularly paid off. Turns out understanding technology from the ground up made you very good at identifying genuine innovation versus hype." She handed me another document. "Your liquid assets alone are approaching $150 million. Your grandfather was right. Living modestly didn't just test your character, it made you a better businessman." Over the following months, I threw myself into the work I'd been doing in secret for years. Woo Global had opportunities in shipping automation, sustainable logistics, and emerging markets that required the kind of hands-on leadership I was finally free to provide. I spent weeks touring our facilities, meeting with port directors who'd been corresponding with me through intermediaries, and developing strategies that would position the company for the next decade. But I also began building something new: a public presence. The business world took notice immediately. "Woo Global Air emerges from the shadows," read the Wall Street Journal headline when I appeared at my first shipping industry conference. Forbes followed up with a profile titled "The Billion-Dollar Recluse: Adrian Woo's Surprising Path to Power." I gave carefully crafted interviews about my unconventional approach to learning the business, about how I'd chosen to understand the real world before taking my place in the family legacy. The media ate it up, portraying me as a human genius who had deliberately lived among ordinary people to better understand the global economy Woo Global helped power. "Mr. Woo's approach is refreshing," the CEO of a major logistics firm told Fortune magazine. "Too many heirs are handed their positions without understanding what it means to work for a living. Adrian Woo knows what it's like to earn every dollar." If only they knew how literally true that was. The social invitations began immediately. Galas, charity auctions, private dinners with other families whose names were carved into the architecture of global commerce. I accepted them all, making my first public appearances in 7 years at events where a single table cost more than most people's annual salaries. And that's when I started seeing Clara's posts. Her Instagram had evolved again, this time documenting her life with Victor Lang. Photos of champagne brunches, designer shopping trips, and nights out at restaurants I recognized as expensive, but not exclusive. Victor was clearly wealthy, but it was new money, flashy money, the kind that needed to be displayed constantly to feel real. "Living my best life with my best life," she captioned a photo of herself draped across Victor's lap at some rooftop bar, both of them holding champagne flutes and staring intently at the camera. The comments were telling. Her followers were impressed, certainly, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Goals, but also, "This is the third champagne post this week," one person wrote. "We get it, you're rich now," said another. Clara was trying too hard, and her audience was starting to notice. Meanwhile, my own public emergence was being handled very differently. Naomi had hired a discreet public relations firm that specialized in old money visibility, the kind of exposure that suggested power without flaunting it. My interviews focused on business philosophy and global trade. My public appearances were at charity events and industry conferences. When photographers captured me, it was usually in understated suits that cost more than most people's cars, but looked almost modest in their perfection. I wasn't performing wealth, I was simply allowing my actual position in the world to become visible. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I received an invitation that made me smile for the first time in longer than I could remember. The International Shipping Council's annual gala was being held in Manhattan, honoring visionaries in global commerce. Woo Global was being recognized for our innovations in sustainable shipping, and I was expected to accept the award personally. The guest list read like a directory of global power brokers, but one name caught my attention. Victor Lang was listed as a sponsor, having apparently contributed
5 years. That's how long it took for the full scope of my transformation to become undeniable, and for Clara's carefully constructed new life to begin cracking at its beautiful, superficial foundation. Those 5 years were a masterclass in the difference between building something lasting and simply spending someone else's money to create the illusion of success. Woo Global's expansion under my direct leadership was nothing short of revolutionary. The shipping automation systems I'd developed, using skills I'd learned troubleshooting IT networks, ironically, reduced cargo handling time by 40% across our major ports. Our sustainable shipping initiative, powered by a hybrid fleet that I'd personally designed the logistics systems for, earned us partnerships with every major global retailer committed to reducing their carbon footprint. By year 3, Woo Global had acquired 2 of our largest competitors. By year 4, we'd opened new shipping corridors through the Arctic that revolutionized trade between Asia and North America. By year 5, Forbes had named me one of the 40 under 40 business visionaries, and Woo Global had become the largest privately held shipping company in the world. But the real satisfaction came from watching Clara's journey during those same 5 years. At first, her life with Victor Lang looked like everything she'd dreamed of. Her Instagram became a carefully curated showcase of luxury. Private jet photos, Victor's leased Cessna, designer shopping sprees, mostly paid for with Victor's increasingly strained credit, and exclusive restaurant experiences, where Victor would loudly name-drop to make sure other diners knew who he was. "Year 2 of living my authentic life," she posted on their anniversary, showing off a Cartier bracelet that I happen to know cost roughly $30,000. "Grateful for a partner who sees my worth and isn't afraid to invest in our future." The comments were effusive, but I noticed something she probably didn't. Her engagement was dropping. The lifestyle content that had once felt aspirational to her followers was starting to feel repetitive and, frankly, boring. Clara had built her brand on being relatable and genuine. Her new life was neither. Meanwhile, Victor's real estate empire was facing challenges he hadn't anticipated. The luxury real estate market in New York had become oversaturated, and several of his high-profile projects were stalling due to financing issues. I knew this because Woo Global had been approached to invest in one of his developments, a proposal I rejected after Naomi's research revealed Victor's over-leveraging and questionable business partnerships. Mr. Lang's company is essentially a house of cards built on appreciation speculation, she had reported. He's betting that luxury real estate will continue climbing indefinitely, but he has no diversification and no liquid reserves. One market correction and he'll be in serious trouble. I filed that information away for future reference. By year 3, the cracks were becoming visible even to casual observers. Victor's social media posts became less frequent, and when he did appear, it was often at the same handful of restaurants and venues, suggesting a social circle that was contracting rather than expanding. Clara's content began featuring more vintage and thrift finds, which she spun as environmental consciousness, but which I suspected reflected a tightening budget. Sustainability is so chic, she posted, wearing a dress she claimed was pre-loved Gucci, but which looked suspiciously like a contemporary knockoff. Why buy new when there are so many treasures waiting to be rediscovered? Her follower count had plateaued around 180,000. Impressive for a normal person, but devastating for someone whose entire identity was built on continuous growth and increasing influence. Meanwhile, my own public profile was expanding in ways that felt both natural and inevitable. The Harvard Business Review published my essay on sustainable logistics for global commerce. The Economic Forum invited me to speak on panels about the future of international trade. When the president announced a new initiative on American shipping competitiveness, Woo Global was mentioned specifically as an example of innovation and leadership. I wasn't trying to outshine Clara. Honestly, most days I barely thought about her at all. But our paths through the world had diverged so dramatically that we might as well have been living on different planets. The 4th year brought what Naomi called the beginning of the end for Victor's empire. A major recession hit the luxury real estate market, and suddenly Victor's strategy of betting everything on continuous appreciation looked less like vision and more like reckless gambling. 3 of his developments went into foreclosure. His investors, many of whom had been friends and social connections, began to distance themselves as lawsuits multiplied. Clara's posts during this period became increasingly defensive and abstract. True wealth isn't about material possessions. It's about experiences and relationships, she wrote alongside a photo of herself and Victor at what appeared to be a casual dinner at a chain restaurant. Gone were the champagne bottles and designer shopping bags, replaced by inspirational quotes about gratitude and authentic living. The irony was exquisite. Clara, who had left me because I valued relationships over material wealth, was now discovering that Victor's material wealth had been largely illusionary, and that without it, their relationship was built on nothing substantial. But the real turning point came in year 5, when Victor's legal troubles escalated from civil lawsuits to criminal investigations. It turned out that several of Victor's projects had been financed through what federal investigators called fraudulent lending practices and investor deception. The FBI raided his offices on a Tuesday morning, and by that afternoon, the story was front-page news in the New York Post. Real estate mogul faces fraud charges. Clara's response was to go completely silent on social media for 2 weeks. When she finally posted again, it was a single photo of a sunset with the caption, "Sometimes life takes us through storms to teach us what really matters." The comment section told the whole story. "Wait, what happened to Victor? Haven't seen him in your posts lately." Another wrote, "Girl, are you okay? You've been posting a lot of cryptic stuff." But the comment that made me actually laugh out loud came from someone who clearly remembered Clara's previous life. "Didn't you used to be married to some tech guy? Wonder what happened to him?" I knew exactly what happened to some tech guy. That same month, Woo Global announced our largest acquisition ever, a European shipping consortium that would make us the dominant force in transatlantic cargo. The deal, worth $2.3 billion, put Woo Global's valuation at over $15 billion, and my personal net worth at well over $1 billion. I wondered what she was thinking as she scrolled through my accomplishments, my photos at international summits, my interviews in major publications. Did she remember the pathetic man she'd divorced? Did she recognize anything of the husband she found so embarrassingly ordinary? More importantly, did she understand what she'd walked away from? I was about to find out, because that same week, I received an invitation that would put us in the same room for the first time since our divorce was finalized. The International Shipping Council's annual gala, where I'd be receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award for innovations in global logistics, and where Victor Lang, despite his legal troubles, was still listed as a sponsor. It was time for Clara to meet the real Adrian Wu, and I had front row seats to watch her world collapse when she realized that her upgrade had actually been the most expensive downgrade in the history of marriage. The only question was whether she'd have the courage to face me when she understood the magnitude of her mistake.
The International Shipping Council Gala was held at the Plaza Hotel, in the same ballroom where Gatsby might have thrown his most extravagant parties. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables that cost $50,000 each to sponsor, filled with the kind of people whose decisions moved global markets and shaped international policy. I arrived in a Tom Ford tuxedo that had been custom-tailored in Milan, driving myself in the Aston Martin DB11 I'd bought not for ostentation, but because after 7 years of pretending to be ordinary, I'd developed an appreciation for extraordinary craftsmanship. Naomi met me at the entrance, stunning in a midnight blue gown that complemented her role as my +1 and closest advisor. "Table 1, she murmured as we walked through the reception area, right in front of the stage, as requested. And yes, I confirmed that Mr. Lang's table is positioned with a perfect view of yours." I scanned the crowd, taking in the familiar faces of shipping executives, government officials, and old money families whose ancestors had built America's commercial infrastructure. This was my world now, openly and unapologetically. These were my peers, my colleagues, my equals. And then I saw her. Clara stood near the bar, and for a moment I barely recognized the woman I'd been married to. She was still beautiful, that hadn't changed, but everything else about her had been diminished. Her dress was elegant, but not designer. Her jewelry lovely, but not luxury. Most telling of all, she was standing slightly behind Victor, positioned like an accessory rather than an equal partner. Victor himself looked like a man trying desperately to maintain appearances while his world collapsed around him. His tuxedo was expensive but not perfectly fitted, his smile bright but strained. I could see the stress in the way he held his shoulders, the careful way he positioned himself to show his best angle to the photographers circulating through the crowd. But it was Clara's expression that fascinated me. She was scanning the room with the intensity of someone trying to map the territory of a world she didn't quite belong to. Her influencer instincts were still sharp. I watched her identify the most important people, the best photo opportunities, the conversations worth joining. But she moved through it all like an outsider looking in. Then our eyes met across the crowded reception area, and I watched 5 years of carefully constructed confidence crumble in real time. Clara's face went through a series of expressions so quickly, it was like watching a time-lapse video. Surprise, confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like panic. She grabbed Victor's arm and whispered something urgent in his ear. He looked in my direction, and I saw the exact moment he realized who I was. You see, Victor knew the Wu name. Every real estate developer in New York knew Wu Global Shipping. We owned too much waterfront property and controlled too many import channels for anyone in his business to ignore us. But he'd never connected the dots between his girlfriend's ex-husband and one of the most powerful families in international commerce. I raised my champagne glass slightly in their direction. a gesture that could be interpreted as polite acknowledgement or subtle mockery depending on one's perspective, and watched Victor's face go pale. "Mr. Wu?" A voice beside me interrupted the moment. "I'm James Morrison from the Financial Times. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about Wu Global's expansion into automated logistics." I spent the next 20 minutes giving interviews, posing for photos, and accepting congratulations from industry colleagues. All the while, I was aware of Clara and Victor having what appeared to be an increasingly tense conversation by the bar. I couldn't hear their words, but their body language told a story of revelation, recrimination, and rapidly dawning horror. When dinner was announced, I made my way to table 1 with Naomi on my arm. Wu Global's placement at the most prestigious table wasn't an accident. It reflected our company's position as the evening's primary honoree and largest sponsor. As I pulled out Naomi's chair, I had a clear view of table 17, where Clara and Victor were seated with other mid-tier sponsors and their guests. Clara was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Victor was frantically typing on his phone, probably Googling my name and discovering just how catastrophically he'd underestimated his girlfriend's ex-husband. The dinner proceeded with the ritualized elegance of high society fundraising. Multiple courses prepared by celebrity chefs, speeches by industry leaders, and the kind of networking that happened naturally when you gathered the world's most influential people in one room. When my name was announced for the Lifetime Achievement Award, I walked to the podium aware that every eye in the room was on me, but none more intensely than Clara's. 5 years ago, I began, looking out at the sea of faces that represented the global shipping industry. I was working as an IT specialist, troubleshooting networks and fixing servers. Tonight, I stand before you as the CEO of the world's largest privately held shipping company. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience. My story had become legendary in business circles. The humble tech worker who had risen to command a shipping empire through vision, hard work, and strategic thinking. But the real lesson of my journey isn't about business success. It's about the difference between authentic value and superficial appearances. It's about the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, not who they appear to be on the surface. Clara's face was now completely white. She understood exactly who I was talking to. In our industry, we move cargo worth trillions of dollars every year, but the most valuable things we transport aren't goods or commodities. They're trust, reliability, and authentic partnership. When you're moving someone's livelihood across an ocean, appearances don't matter. Character does. I turned to walk away, then paused and looked back at her one more time. Clara, I hope you find what you're looking for, but you need to understand it was never about the money. If you had stayed, if you had chosen to build a life with me instead of looking for someone to fund the life you wanted, I would have shared everything with you gladly. The tragedy isn't that you lost access to my wealth. The tragedy is that you never understood you already had access to something much more valuable. My love, my loyalty, and my partnership. As I walked back toward the ballroom, I heard her call my name one more time, but I didn't turn around. That chapter of my life was closed, and I was finally ready to write a new one. Naomi appeared at my side as I rejoined the celebration. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. "Exactly as expected," I said. She wanted a second chance. And? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. I told her the truth, that some chances, once lost, can never be recovered. Later that night, as I drove home through the streets of Manhattan in my Aston Martin, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 7 years ago, I'd chosen to live small, to discover something large about love and authenticity. Tonight, I'd finally received confirmation that the experiment had been a complete success. Clara had taught me that some people love you for who you are, and others love you for what you can provide. The difference between those two kinds of love is the difference between partnership and transaction, between authentic connection and elaborate performance. And now, finally free of both my grandfather's test and my ex-wife's expectations, I was ready to find someone who could love Adrian Wu, all of him, including the parts that came with private jets and shipping empires and more money than most people could ever imagine. But this time, I'd know the difference between real love and everything else that masquerades as love in a world obsessed with status and wealth. This time, I'd choose someone who would have loved the IT specialist just as much as the billionaire. And Clara Bennett, who once found me so embarrassingly ordinary, would spend the rest of her life knowing she'd walked away from extraordinary, and that some mistakes are too expensive to ever be forgiven. The test was over. I'd passed with flying colors, and the real adventure of my life was just beginning.